The problem with industrial concentration is that at the end, you end up with one or few companies that dominate industries. And they behave then like monopolists and prevent newcomers from gaining market share. You understand? They stifle innovation. Capitalism is a dynamic process where continuously companies go bankrupt. That's good because it allows new companies that are more efficient to come up and succeed. So in the capitalistic economy, it's dynamic. It never stagnates. But the current crony capitalism that we have leads to some stagnation because the big companies dominate entire industries. And in America and also elsewhere, I observe small business owners are driven out of business by the big corporations. Now you may say, well, the mom and pop shop in the street gets eliminated because they're not efficient and can't compete against Walmart and Dollar Tree and Dollar General and so forth. That is true. But at the same time, if regulation makes it difficult for small business owners to actually open a business because there's too much regulation. You understand? If Starbucks goes into Prague and opens shops, they have a lawyer, they have people they specialize in water, they have people specializing in noise, they know the regulation and so forth. You and I, if we open a coffee shop, it will take us 3 years because the regulation is so difficult. So they have a competitive advantage because of their size and because of regulation that makes it difficult for small people to survive. And I've seen this in Thailand. During COVID, all the small shops had to close down, except like 7-Eleven. They could stay open because they're owned by some rich guy with connections. This is a testimony that democracies do not work because it's a mob rule. It's ruled by idiots. They vote for the most incompetent people you can imagine. Trudeau, he's a complete nonsense person. He got elected 3 times. You know, I could have forgiven the Canadian to vote for him once and then kick him out. And you look at France, they have Macron. What a joke. No Frenchman likes Macron, not one. And same, the industrial policy in Germany is a complete disaster. When I grew up, Germany was the miracle of economies because it grew rapidly with no inflation, had a strong currency, everything. And what did this government do over the last 5 years? It committed economic suicide. Hard to believe. But I know the leader of the AfD, Alice Weidel, and I said to her, don't you have rich donors? She said, no, they're afraid. This is the state of democracy in the Western world. They're afraid to support parties that are, the press, the media calls them right-wing. For me, they're center. I am more on the right than all these parties in Germany and in Switzerland. Because I studied history, I'm interested in history. I can tell you what is happening at the present time in the Western world is economic suicide, financed by the central bankers. You're an optimist. You said that there are many countries that don't trust the US dollar. I'd say you have to be crazy to trust the US dollar. Because if you hold assets as a country in the US, they can any day blackmail you and take it away. As they froze the assets of the Russians, and not only the Russians, of others, including Afghanistan, one of the poorest countries in the world, they seized the assets. So nobody trusts the US dollar. But in the meantime, let's give you my example. I manage portfolios and I manage my private assets. I hold more US dollars than any other currency except gold. But the other currencies are even worse. I mean, what is good about the euro? Look at Mrs. Lagarde. She's a complete incompetent central banker. Not that Miss Yellen was any better. The last good central banker in America was Paul Volcker. Greenspan was a very intelligent man as a central banker, but he is establishment. He's the deep state. He financed happily the expansion of government through monetary policies. But he was better than what came after him. Bernanke is a money printer. Bernanke belongs into Zimbabwe. Robert Mugabe is his ideal, the money printer by excellence. I think more and more trade will occur between Russia and foreign countries and China and foreign countries without clearing in the US. So the reserve status of the dollar is in decline, and it will one day accelerate massively because economically seen, the US dollar is grossly overvalued compared to currencies like in China or in Asia in general. But in financial terms, it's not terribly overvalued. So what the US could do one day, many countries have done this before, as you know. They introduced a dual currency for financial transactions and for trade transactions. It's a failure. It's a disastrous policy. But countries have the tendency to embark on disastrous policies like money printing. Every society in history ended up printing money because it's much more convenient to print money than to tell the voters, oh, we have to increase taxation, or tell the voters, we have to cut your benefits. Your pension fund, instead of getting 100 a month, you will now get 60 a month. Politically, in a democracy, it's not acceptable. The democracy is a failure because the policies that lead to inflation are very popular. You know, you get money from the government for this and for that, free education, free healthcare. But the tax that is paid on that is inflation, the horrible tax. It touches poor people much more than rich people. How will the world look like in 5 years? I have no clue. The only thing I know is once a government begins to print money, and once you have the fiscal deficits as we have, it's very difficult to get out of it without a significant adjustment in standards of living. In other words, you go through a crisis phase. I think the governments in democracies want to postpone that, so they will print money. And as long as they print money, the purchasing power of money will go down. Now, what will protect you? I suppose that some sort of real estate can protect you that is good value. In the countryside, real estate is good value. And in the cities in Europe and the US, it tends to be overvalued. And two, I suppose that precious metals can protect you. I don't think that gold is that cheap, but still my largest position. And three, it is possible that future currencies will be sort of crypto-similar currencies. The difficulty is to decide which crypto, because as you know, we have thousands of different cryptos in the world. In my view, cryptos are a wonderful scam. My sense is that the debts cannot be repaid. I think they will continue to print money. But of course, one day there will be a massive crisis and defaults. It's going to be very messy when it happens because, say in the US, domestic pension funds, they own treasuries and all sort of agency bonds from the US. So if the government defaults, then the pension funds cannot pay the benefits and so forth and so on. But they could say, well, we stop paying interest to the foreigners. Again, it will be very messy because then nobody will trust to hold dollars in the US. I mean, I studied financial policy, and my thesis for my PhD was about the financial reform of Robert Peel. And I studied under a professor, among others, called Heinz Haller. Haller was the intellectual behind the value-added tax. And taxation is very, very complex because you can increase the taxation on Marc Faber, but I can roll it over to somebody else. In the end, somebody else pays the tax and not me. It's like the rich people, they benefit from inflation, whereas the poor people are hurt. But I am against any intervention by the government because it's very complex and we never know exactly what the consequences will be. The only thing I can say, the current financial market expansion, which is much more rapid than the economic expansion, is not sustainable in the long run. Now, someone will say to me, well, that was a problem 20 years ago. Yes, that's correct. I said it already 20 years ago. It's just become bigger and bigger. And in the end, what you suggested, the government will have no option but to print money because they will need the money to pay the interest on the debt. And that by itself very inflationary. But as you know, the world is complex. You may say the last 5 years we have a lot of inflation, but what went down are commercial property values throughout Europe and the US. The US in this period, the residential market is booming and the commercial market has collapsed. The buildings you can buy for $10 for nothing. They give it to you. I've seen nice buildings in Los Angeles down 70% in 5 years. The world is now at a very interesting juncture because in Argentina, you have a president who essentially cut the government expenditures and reduced the budget deficit and has lowered the rate of inflation. And the stock market went ballistic. A year ago, I was recommending people to buy Bank Macro, is quoted in New York. Since then, the stock has gone from about $20 to $120. That shows the capitalists and it shows the rich people. If they want booming stock markets, they have to bring their house in order. One thing that is common to the world everywhere, people like money. They like to work, they want to have responsibility, and they like freedom and so forth. In my view, we could have in Europe a move to the right. If the move to the right occurs, and we had it in Italy, then I think that asset markets will do very well. And in Asia, as I said, we have good value. I have most of my money in Asian stocks, also Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, and of course, Hong Kong. The bureaucracy is very limited in Hong Kong. The government is about 15% of the economy. Compare that with Germany or France, it's close to 60% of the economy.